How the media, not FDR, created Social Security. This is insane, and you're not going to hear it anyplace else because a lot of people just don't take the time to actually read, and it's unfortunate because history is a great guide for the future. Remember, all these people on the right say the Democrats control the media, and I'm going to prove it to you once and for all, again, that the media controls the Democrats. In fact, the media controls the Republicans too. The Republicans are the Washington Generals. The members of the Washington Generals get paid a good amount of money to participate in the entertainment that is basketball against the Harlem Globetrotters. The same thing with the Republicans, the Lindsey Grahams of the world and all these guys, Mitch McConnell's. They get paid wealth beyond their wildest dreams for who they really are as human beings to participate in the entertainment that is politics. Anyway, so I'm just going to share with this. This is nuts, and it's from this book right here, Stories of America, True Stories from the American Past. 1 second. The article is right here is called The Townsend Movement and Social Security by my man William Graebner. William Graebner had written a book, I forgot what it's called, Retirement, History of Retirement America or something like that, I forgot. But anyway, a great article, and I wasn't aware of the Townsend movement or Francis Townsend. But right here, when Townsend first made his proposal in the fall, and we're going to get in the FDR in just a second. When Francis Townsend first made his proposal in the fall of 1933, a small number of Americans had some kind of claim to an old age pension. Federal service employees were minimally covered under a law passed in 1920. Some military, state, and veterans, some military, state, and municipal employees could look forward to future benefits as well. And about 10% of the employees in the private sector had some kind of coverage. So this is in 1933. The Depression has been going on for a couple of years now. And depression just means a massive deflation. All right, so Francis Townsend said, man, we got to get these old people, A, we got to remove them from the workforce so young people can take their jobs because there's not enough jobs go around. And B, these old people have no money. We got to give them some money. And in fact, he's the demand side economist. We got supply side, and then you get demand side. If we give these people money to spend, they'll create a turnover of money, a velocity of money that will create more and more transactions, more and more jobs. And so that was the point of Keynesian economics, basically. The demand side, create this money movement, a velocity of money that gets turned over and over again. And when I spend my money on dog food, the guy who owns the dog food spends his money on cat food. The guy who owns the cat food spends his money on going to the Atlanta Braves game. The velocity of money, and that, it's actually a very seductive economic kind of thought process. It doesn't really work the way they anticipated, but be it as it may, I get it. In fact, during the Great Depression, when there's times of depression, massive deflation, massive recession, you need to have some kind of demand side economy, because what happens is, like happened in Japan, people just start hoarding. They start hoarding. I'm not spending anything. All right. So on June 8th, this is 1934, excuse me, right here. Excuse me, let's start back. In early March, Franklin Roosevelt, March of 1934, Franklin Roosevelt discussed the problem over lunch with General Electric president Gerald Swope, a reform-minded businessman whose company had contributory pension plans in which employees contributed a portion of their earnings. Like many executives of the nation's largest corporations, Swope believed that only contributory plans would allow employees the freedom to leave one job and go to another. Contributory, you put money in, you have the freedom to leave. You're not attached to that job like these fools. We need pensions for life. In fact, Swope says, you could leave one job and one geographical location for another. On June 5th, Roosevelt said he favored a system funded by contributions, not by an increase in general taxation. All right. So Roosevelt was cool with it. He's like, yeah, no, I get this, man. We got to do something, but we don't want to just tax people. We don't put them on the dole. We don't want to put them on welfare. We want to increase. We want them to have old age people to have retirement plans, but we want them to be part of it. That's skin in the game. We want them to contribute their own money so it's theirs. It can't be taken away from them. All right. So then he created this thing called the Committee on Economic Security. All right. But then he said right here, but Roosevelt was giving. So in June, Roosevelt created the Committee of Economic Security. He hired a couple of people, one guy from the University of Wisconsin, one lady from the professor of law at the University of California. But a couple months goes by, and Roosevelt's like, not so sure. Roosevelt was giving the Committee of Economic Security negative signals. He's like, I'm not sure we can do this. In fact, he said on November 14th, Roosevelt said, He said, I do not know whether this is the time for any federal legislation on old age security. All right, so remember, this is in 1934. What was going on before that? Well, before that, we had the National Recovery Act of 1933 passed. All right, we had the AAA, right here, the AAA passed in 1933 as well, Agricultural Adjustment Administration. We had tons of stuff going on in the previous year, 1933 and 1934. So Roosevelt's like, I'm not sure we can do this. In fact, this book right here defines all the is such a good book, dude. Bernard Segan, I think University of San Diego law professor. Just so much was going on back then that Roosevelt's, I'm not sure we can add to the plate. In fact, check this out. You want to hear something crazy? This is the regulation of milk prices. Now, this isn't from the, let me share it here right quick. And just, during 1931, milk prices in New York State declined drastically. And during 1932, prices farmers received for milk were below the cost of production. So they're losing by producing milk. A joint committee of the state Senate, this is in New York State, and Assembly was created to investigate the situation and to recommend solutions. All right? So what they're trying to do is that they adopted a statute effectively making milk industry a public utility and establishing a 3-member milk control board with vast powers to regulate the industry, including setting prices at the retail level. In fixing prices, the board had to consider the amount necessary to yield a reasonable return to the farmers. The primary objective of the legislation was to improve the farmers' economic outlook, economic position. The board made it a crime to sell milk below 9 cents a quart in a retail store. So Nebbia, who owned a small store in Rochester, sold 2 bottles of milk and a loaf of bread for 18 cents and was subsequently convicted of committing a misdemeanor for violating the milk control laws. Prices at which producers could sell were not then prescribed, nor was production in any way unlimited. However, in Nebbia versus New York, the United States Supreme Court upheld the conviction against a challenge that had violated the seller's right under the 14th Amendment Due Process and Equal Protection Clause. This opinion was historically significant in that it signaled the approaching end of economic due process, which actually terminated 3 years later when, unfortunately, FDR was able to cajole the Supreme Court to see things his way. So we had minimum wage laws, all this stuff passed. Horrible economic legislation passed by FDR, which prolonged and increased the Great Depression, by the way. Anyway, but so 1934, Roosevelt's like, I'm not so sure I get basically the political capital to see this through. But check this out. All right. So again, he says, I do not know this is the time for any federal legislation on old age security. According to Douglas Brown, a deeply distressed, this is a researcher, a deeply distressed Committee of Economic Security staff now took desperate measures. Barbara Armstrong, the professor of law from the University of California, Berkeley, who was in charge of the Committee for Economic Security, used her contacts at Scripps Howard chain of newspapers to generate an editorial questioning Roosevelt's commitment to an old age legislation. So they're writing op-eds saying Roosevelt is not committed to providing elderly income for the elderly, based on Barbara Armstrong cajoling, basically saying, "Hey, media, write this article," and they did, because she had contacts. Upset and exasperated, the president Roosevelt got on the phone to Francis Perkins, who was the chair of the Department of Labor secretary. I think it's Francis Perkins, who in turn sounded out, he said this, he says, a much excited Roosevelt asked why the speech had received such bad press. He was like, what's going on? Why am I getting so much bad press in the media? Because previous to that, the media was just, licking, kissing Roosevelt's butt. And from then on, Roosevelt seemed to take a greater interest in old age insurance. Isn't that interesting? Because what's happening here is we got the Townsend movement creating this this huge political outcry for old age insurance. Roosevelt pretended they didn't exist. Roosevelt said, I'm not sure we have the political capital to do this. Barbara Armstrong, the Committee for Economic Security, who Roosevelt appointed, said, I got to get my media people to write bad stuff about Roosevelt to make him scared about the media. And then the Social Security Act was passed in 1935. Very interesting. In fact, you can see right here, House hearings on the president's economic security bill. And you can see right here, cover report. Watch this. So here is the Committee on Ways and Means of the House of Representatives, 74th Congress, H.R. 4120, a bill to alleviate the hazards of old age, unemployment, illness, and dependency established, because the government can do it. And we got this guy right here, Edwin Witt, who is a professor from the University of Wisconsin, who literally had the U.S. Post Office investigate the Townsend movement to see if they're doing anything wrong by basically saying, I don't know if I have it in here, but he had an investigation on the, let me see if I can, yeah, right here. Check this out. So let's see. Witt had asked Witt is one of the big guys in the Committee for Economic Security. Witt had asked the Postmaster General to investigate the Townsend movement to determine if funds sent through the U.S. mails were being used for illegitimate purposes. Because basically throughout the fall of 1934, the Committee for Economic Security functioned under the shadow of the growing Townsend movement. The pressure from the Townsendites was intense. Roosevelt began telling people he was in favor of adding an old age insurance clause to the bill and putting in 1-through-1 package. So basically what happened was Roosevelt was cajoled by the media to pass Social Security Act. And it's very interesting because initially, check this out. Initially, many Americans weren't covered. Over 9 million Americans, domestic servants, government employees, farm workers, and everyone over age 65 was not eligible for old age insurance, what Americans refer to today as the Social Security. And in contrast, the very rich were entitled. So farm workers, government employees, domestic servants, anyone over 65 were not entitled to the benefit. Those who qualified were to begin paying into the system immediately, but they would not see their first checks, until 1942. Until then, those over 65 could apply to the respective state old age assistance programs that averaged $19.21 a month, or even as low as $4, less than $4 in Mississippi. Anyway, the point being is, FDR was not in favor of it. The media cajoled him. And now we have Social Security. The media controls everything. In fact, it's very interesting, too, just about the two-party system. Check this out. The major parties, fearful that an attack against the Townsend movement by one of the two parties, the Democrats or Republicans, would injure the party taking the initiative. All right, so the Democrats are in control, but they didn't want to attack the Townsend movement because they didn't want it to seem like we're going, because the Townsendites had millions of members. So what they did is they engaged in a bipartisan They joined forces to both investigate the Townsend movement, and so they investigated him. They had him called before Congress, and then when Townsend walked away from the investigation, he was basically called to Capitol Hill to testify. He walked away from what he rightly called an inquisition. They made sure that the 1936 elections were over before they issued a citation for contempt of Congress against Francis Townsend. So they didn't want the Democrats to, again, as we talked about at the beginning, this is the Washington Generals, Republicans. They didn't want the Democrats to take all the arrows. They said, we'll join you in going after Townsend. And then Townsend walked away and said, "What? This is an inquisition." Yeah, but hey, you can't blame one political party. You can blame us both. And what else are you going to do? Well, they ran for a third party and they got they got like less than 1 million votes. It's just the political nature of our system is scratch each other's back, dude. It's just that simple. So you have the media in control. The Republicans play the Washington Generals. The Democrats are the Harlem Globetrotters, but they still take their guidance from the media. That's all there is to it, man. And if you think any other way, you're wrong. You're just wrong. And as such, don't let politics dictate your life, because it's just, you're not going to win. All right. Love your thoughts. God bless. Lots of good stuff. If you want to get this book, like, remember, this is just such a wonderful book to read about the history of all the different things that happen in economic legislation that just not just the Warren Court. Everyone thinks about the Warren Court, in terms of civil rights, but the economic liberties is what we're talking about here. Not civil rights, civil liberties. We're talking economic liberties, and just how it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, I'm just the idea that a guy was going to go to jail for selling milk below price, that 3 guys in New York State said it had to be crazy. All right, God bless. We'll see you.